Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Immigrantly. We hope you are doing well, feeling well, and thinking well. You know what they say about the mind, body, and soul, right? It is important we are taking care of ourselves and each other, all of which, by the way, I am seeing in abundance right now. And it gives me so much joy. Do you know what else gives me joy? Food. Delicious, aromatic, colorful dishes that not only fill the stomach but our energy too. And right now, during Ramzan, the only thing I can think about is food, food, and more food. Today, we have a guest who activates this mindset and puts it forth to the masses in the field of journalism. Yara Elmjouie. You may know him from Al Jazeera Plus, from his political articles in The Guardian. Maybe you follow him on Twitter or have learned how to make Iranian pizza from his Instagram, because I surely have. At the heart of his involvement, Yara draws on an element that binds all of us together: cross borders and cross cultures. You guessed it right: food. Food sustains us. More importantly, it nourishes us through the interactions cooking encourages, the traditions a recipe draws upon, and the community all this fosters. Yara's production in real life shares these discoveries with us. The show is structured in short documentaries on conversations around food, from its flavors to its history to its socio-political implications.
Hi, my name's Yara, and I tell stories at AJ Plus.
Oh god.
This smells sparkling.
This is amazing.
Filet mignon. But there's one kind of story I like telling the most.
I am eating your food.
The kind I can eat my way through
I'm gonna take you into my secret kitchen.
I'm supposed to eat whatever's in this box.
and immerse myself in.
Look what I found. Why would someone throw this away?
You know, get up close and personal,
Oh my god. Ooh, that's amazing.
and question what we think we know.
Did your parents cook with MSG?
Absolutely. It's just like salt and pepper.
And maybe together, we'll learn something along the way.
Sounds interesting, right? These episodes are abundant in wacky dishes and comical relief, just as they are attuned to discussions on what food means to identity and community. And I come from Pakistan, so for me, food is at the heart of our culture and our identity. Yara is here today to engage with us on a topic we can all relate to. Besides his obvious passion for cooking and sharing that passion with others, Yara is also politically involved. His journalism is imbued with themes of heritage and culture, how immigrants preserve and redefine theirs in the larger context of America and this global world. I can't wait to hear about the crazy dishes he's tried and the stories behind and that which have led to them. So without further ado, let's get started.
I think there's a lot to be said about edible insects, especially as a sustainable source of protein for the future. Apparently, as the planet's population continues to balloon, we're going to need to find other sources of protein that, for one, don't murder the environment with massive amounts of CO2 emissions, but two, are also packed with nutrients that we need.
So Yara, thank you so much for coming on my show. And I'm really excited we are doing this episode during Ramzan, because this is the only time during a year when I get excited about food and cooking food. So I have a lot of questions for you. But before we delve into, the broader stuff, I want to start with the basics. So what I see in food industry, there is this culture and even social economy around food, right? So we see recipe developers, we see people who focus on certain diets, we see people taking photographs of food, and then there are traveling documentarians. Where do you see yourself on this broad spectrum of what food industry has to offer?
It's a great question because I try to shoot for kind of a weird intersection of humor and cooking And you don't normally see like comedy cooking. Like I don't think anyone really has like a comedy cooking show. But it's kind of that weird crossroads that we don't normally see in the industry. We have definitely someone who offers tips on how to cook a meal in 30 minutes. Obviously Rachel Ray popularized that. I think she came back for a new season just recently after a very, very long hiatus where I think the show had come to an end and then they just restarted it. And then you have people who explore kind of the underbelly of the food industry. Then you have people who explore, incredible fusion restaurants and recipes, and people who explore how you can be a better cook at home, offering some no-nonsense tips. And so, and then lastly, people who look at the evolution of food and what it means and what place it kind of occupies in our society today. So in kind of mentioning all these examples, I've run through David Chang, I've talked about Samin Nosrat, I've talked about, Rachel Ray and all these other kind of celebrity chefs and people who do food programs and, Gordon Ramsay, But yeah, I think what I'm doing is kind of like a mix of that chef from Ratatouille who's like, anyone can cook, and humor and just being fun in the kitchen, I guess. It's kind of a weird thing. And then the second offering, I guess, the thing that I like to try to do is I like to reach into my heritage. So I'm of an Iranian background. And sort of now, as I'm nearing the end of my 20s, I feel comfortable enough in the kitchen and comfortable enough with my heritage to, as I like to say, bastardize my heritage's recipes. So
I wanted to ask you something about bastardizing your heritage recipe, because I have to admit, I have been scrolling through your Instagram a lot more these days, considering quarantine and all the humor and ideas that you have. And honestly, your Instagram is so authentic. It doesn't have these extravagant filters and edits. And there was this one video that caught my attention. I think you posted it on March 29th, where you're trying to combine lubia pulao with miso paste and possibly gochujang.
I'm going to be combining lubia polo with miso paste, possibly gochujang.
So here's my take on it. The experimentation, I found it extremely rejuvenating and fun. It was fun. But do you think, you'll get pushback for being not as authentic towards your culture, or you're making a play out of staple food of Iran?
Yeah, totally. And definitely you'll see that in the reactions that people have to my content. I've done this before. This is kind of becoming my shtick, where I bastardize an Iranian recipe. And, I first, I think, did it publicly, I guess, with what I call qeime pizza, or it's basically, qeime, which is an Iranian khoresht, or an Iranian stew, and then pizza, which is pizza. And then I kind of basically made this, centuries-old Iranian stew and put it on a pizza. And I think it was an incredible melding together of flavors that really did belong together, but kind of on the question of authenticity and, how people react. I mean, I think, especially, in food media right now, and even just recently, I guess I can say, there's been a discussion of, what does authentic mean? When we say, oh, I want to go to an authentic Iranian restaurant or an authentic Chinese restaurant. When we use that word, what exactly are we trying to say, right? Is it authentic to a specific region of China? Is it authentic to that city in the United States? So, I think David Chang has also explored this in his show Ugly Delicious. We talk about authentic pizza or authentic this and that. Domino's Pizza, for example, is just as authentic as, say, a margarita pizza from, an Italian restaurant in Rome or something, what have you. Or if you go to Napoli, if you go to Naples and you order a pizza there, right? Everything is authentic to its own sort of place and time and space and culture, right? So I think to people who say, oh no, like you're taking this sacred recipe and you're changing it in ways that are very antithetical to Iranian culture. I mean, another big example I would come up with, or a response I would have, in addition to, first off, what is antithetical, what is authentic? The second thing I would say is, look at a lot of kind of staple Iranian dishes today that we know and love. Qeime stew, for example, it features tomato paste, right? It's a tomato-based broth. Tomatoes are not native to Iran. tomatoes, and in fact, I'm doing some research on this to come up with another kind of personal video for my page, but tomatoes came to Iran, if I'm not mistaken, in the past 100 years, 100 to 200 years. It's only been a century or two that tomatoes have been in Iranian cultures. Tomatoes are native to the Americas, right? These are a kind of produce, a vegetable or a fruit, depending on how you want to classify it, that was not available on the Eurasian continent. And it came from, it was traditionally eaten by indigenous peoples of the Americas. And so if you go back in Iran 150 years ago, and you start telling people, oh, I'm going to take this meat stew and I'm going to put a tomato in it, people would have been like, oh, my God, that's not authentic. How could you do that? Right? And now it's one of the most quote unquote authentic Iranian dishes, qeimeh stew, So it's weird how we think about things. So who knows, maybe in 100 years from now, miso paste and gochujang will spread across the world in such a way that Iranian households will use them in every other dish.
But do you think it also matters who's altering the composition? For instance, you're of Iranian descent, right? So if you're doing it, you still get a free pass. But say, if a white chef did it, people will not like it. You have that agency with your culture. You can still experiment because it's your culture at the end of the day. I come from Pakistan, so if I'm cooking dal and I want to experiment with my dal, I'm still of Pakistani origin, so it's okay. Do you think that matters?
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you raise, and I think I kind of want to delve a little bit deeper into it. So first off, I think yes, I think one of the reasons I feel so comfortable and free to sort of bastardize these dishes and even use the word bastardize is because it is from my heritage. I feel like I have some ownership of it. It's part and parcel of my identity, and it's woven into my DNA. I've eaten it since I was a kid. I've loved it and know it. It's something I know so closely and so intimately that I feel comfortable, changing it or transforming it, right? And again, having that sort of heritage connection, of course, right? I'm from the culture, so I'm working with something that is part of me. The second thing, though, I think when we talk about appropriation, and there's definitely a spectrum of views on this, people who have varying opinions. For me, I think we have to sort of distinguish between exploitation and appropriation and sort of appreciation, I guess. I'll do three things. If, let's say, I were a white chef, right, and I were sort of in a way that's not respectful of the source culture, if I was taking that food, right, and if I was changing it in a fundamental way and then claiming ownership of that food and of that recipe and saying, hey, this is mine, and then thirdly, profiting from it while denigrating the original people who made that food, then that is when it becomes very gross to me and definitely an issue of cultural appropriation. I think we have a perfect example of that would be a Chinese restaurant that was opened by a white woman in New York City just recently called Lucky Lee's, I believe, where she advertised her Chinese food as clean Chinese food that's fresh and organic and once again clean and not like that greasy MSG, Chinese food. If you want a clean, I don't know, what's it called, gluten-free, I don't know how she was advertising it, but she used a lot of very dense, coded language there that basically said, my Chinese food is good, me, the white woman who is taking this other person's culture and selling it to you. And the other Chinese foods are greasy. I mean, again, she wasn't directly saying that, but in the language around the advertising, she was saying, this is clean, unlike the other greasy, God knows, MSG filled, blah, 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 blah. First off, I need to say there's nothing wrong with MSG. We have a whole video explaining the science and how a lot of it was fueled, a lot of the outrage and fear of MSG was fueled by xenophobia and faulty science, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, and so that's when it becomes very problematic. Again, this is someone who is denigrating another culture, taking that culture's food, selling it, profiting from it, while again putting down those who came before, and so that to me, I see two different things. Now, if you are a Chinese American chef, an Indian American chef, a white chef, right, and you truly develop a passion and an admiration for another cuisine, and you are not trying to exploit, trying to profit, trying to put down others, trying to denigrate the cuisine in any way, I think this is the beauty of culture, where we experiment with other people's ideas. So I'd love to see kind of like a Southern style, there's this white creamy gravy that they have. I don't know, I'm not as familiar with certain parts of, when I was on a road trip in the Southwest, we came across this, like, what is this creamy white kind of, Southern gravy, I guess, you'll put on biscuits and potatoes, right? So what if you have like a Southern chef who develops a fascination with Iranian cuisine, right? And that person loves korma sabzi and somehow wants to weave together this like home style creamy gravy that he grew up with or she grew up with, and weave it into my culture's food, korma sabzi, and put it together in a way that's respectful, in a way that ideally can acknowledge those who came before her. I personally am not. I don't take tremendous offense. I think food is constantly being innovated. Ideas have shifted hands and changed form throughout continents over history, and we need to be open to that. But again, in a way that's respectful and not exploitative.
So talking about Horme Sabzi, I watched that video that you've been talking about. I saw how you created this delicious pizza. It looked really delicious. And then I brought all the ingredients to cook Horme Sabzi. I was not going to go for pizza. I am not that creative. And then I somehow couldn't because I thought it was so complicated. But during that video, what I noticed was that chef was pushing back on the word stew. And she kept on saying it's not stew, right? It felt like it bothered her, the word itself.
So she used the word khoresht, which is the word that we use in Persian for kind of a braise, as she says, right? It's kind of, it is, we're always kind of in this process of coming up with analogs as immigrants, right? Or as children of immigrants in my case, right? Coming up with analogs, right? We're kind of transplanted from one culture to another, and we want to introduce people in the new culture to our heritage, right? So I am someone who, again, there's differing views that exist on this. Some people are like, you know what, take it or leave it. If you don't get it, if you don't understand my culture, then you know what, sucks for you and you're backwards. I take the other approach, which is like, no, I want to introduce people to the beauty of, Iranian culture, of Middle Eastern cultures, and so on and so forth. So I will take that extra step and maybe try to come up with analogs that they might understand, right? So like, for example, if I tell them khoresht and they're like, what's khoresht? I'm like, well, you don't know what khoresht is. We're not going to stop. We're not going to continue this conversation. No, I wouldn't do that. I would probably be more like, oh, well, something similar in your culture that you have is a stew, something that you braise or a braise, something that you kind of, cook for several hours on a low simmer. You allow the meat and the vegetables to sort of intermingle with their flavors. The meat sort of starts to become more tender and softer as it starts to, simmer in that broth for a while. And so that's how I used to explain it. Now, the point that Najmiya, Chef Najmiya Batman-Khalij brought up is very important as well on the other hand of this side, which I also agree with, which is that I don't think we need to handhold and come up with analogs to the point where we're also erasing sort of what makes our culture unique, right?
Exactly.
So, we have a lot of foreign words, in English, right? From all the different cultures that have intermingled in this language and have come across, English-speaking cultures and ideas that English-speaking cultures have sort of co-opted and taken and transformed and have been blended into American and British and whatever culture you might, as you can imagine. So pizza, right? We have a word like pizza. We have frittata. We have sushi. We have so many words taken from so many cultures. And those words, those foreign words, then become ingrained in the English language, right? And we use those words to refer to that culinary concept or that food. And so Chef Najmiya Batman-Khalij brings up a very important point, which is, we are also an immigrant community. We have come to the United States. Our community has grown significantly over the past, 40 some odd years. Why can't we also contribute some culinary concepts and some, food ideas to what is, considered American cuisine or to the American lexicon? And so that is extremely valid. And why should we not say, and I can simplify, not, the word kh doesn't exist in English, so I don't expect everyone to say khoresht, but why not have people say koresht, like, I made an Iranian koresht yesterday. Again, if you can say frittata, if you can say, Hassan Minhaj had a great kind of story about this recently on, I can't remember what nightly talk show he was on several months ago, where he was like, if you can say Timothy Chalamet, then you can definitely say Hassan Minhaj, so if you can say, if you can say frittata, if you can say sushi, why not koresht? They're both bisyllabic, koresht is just two syllables. You don't have to do the kh, just do the k, and you'll be referring to, a culinary concept that exists in another part of the world, and that might propagate, who knows?
And I do come from that school of thought because, as you mentioned, I feel like it's important that these words and these terms are part of local vernacular now in the US, and we don't have to explain everything. And I could relate to that a lot more because people in America call dal, which is a Pakistani staple, soup. They call it soup. It's not soup. For me, it's almost blasphemous to call it soup.
Because you're erasing, by saying soup, you're erasing what makes it unique.
Exactly. And it really bothers me. And when I was watching that video, I was like, yes, I completely agree. So, Yara, I want to take a step back and ask you, where do you think your fascination with food comes from? And have you always been this adventurous with trying new dishes? And by the way, I have another question for new dishes because I saw another video of yours. But first, I want to understand where this fascination comes from.
You know, I've kind of done some soul searching. It's very interesting. Where does my fascination with with cooking and food come from? So let's start with that one. I think looking back, even when I was in high school, I would invite my friends over and cook for them. This is something that I realized I've been doing for a while, and definitely not in middle school. Definitely that was too early. But then if I dig even deeper, I see that middle school, I loved cooking with my mom and my grandmother. When my parents got divorced, my grandmother came from Iran to the United States to, help my mom get, back on her feet. And so she lived with my mom. And so then I have this like source of Iranian culture, this just like this compendium of every sort of facet of my heritage, just living, breathing next to me, my grandmother. She taught me so much about, again, our heritage, but also about Islam, but also about just, where I come from. And so we would cook together. I would love cooking with her, learning little tips and tricks and just watching and always wanting to have my hands somewhere in the kitchen, like even with my mom. So whether it was my mom, my grandma, there's something I really enjoy about creating things, about making something and then showing that something to someone else so they can enjoy it. And I think whether it's making videos, whether it's making food, that's something that has sort of run through every facet of my life, right? I want to make a thing that will put a smile on your face. Now, whether you eat it or you watch it or you listen to it, there's some sort of inherent joy that I have from bringing joy to others by creating a thing. I could have been a shoemaker. I could have been a blacksmith. I could have made swords, shoes, whatever it was. I just love making a thing. I love being oh God, this sounds weird, but I'm like a worker bee, and I need to work in my little factory and make you a thing. Like that's just kind of what gives my life meaning in many ways. So from an early age, I just loved being in the kitchen. And then in high school, when I kind of developed fully formed arms and limbs and was tall enough, I guess, to access all parts of the kitchen cabinetry, I started cooking for my friends. And I think my first sort of culinary, fascination actually came from Japanese food. Japanese food was, at the time, my absolute favorite cuisine. It ranked even higher than my own culture's cuisine. I loved it more than Iranian food, honestly. And still to this day, this is going to be controversial, but for me, Japanese and Chinese cuisine, now I've kind of changed a little bit, and Chinese cuisine is now my favorite cuisine, especially after visiting China and traveling to various regions with a buddy of mine a few years ago. But yes, Chinese and Japanese cuisine are very near and dear to my heart. So in high school, I experimented with a lot of dishes, a lot of Japanese dishes. And that interest in Japanese cuisine actually came from my fascination with video games, especially Japanese video games, especially the Final Fantasy series, which is a Japanese video game series. So everything is kind of linked in a way. But yeah, I did that in high school, started getting my hands dirty. Then obviously going off to college, you're all alone. If you have that opportunity, sort of living alone, you start cooking for yourself, and cooking sort of becomes this thing that grounds you and brings you back to something familiar when you're away from your parents and you're away from what you find comforting. And but still, just to kind of bring this back to like my heritage, I didn't really start experimenting and cooking Iranian cuisine until just a few years ago, honestly. I didn't cook it in college. I didn't cook it after college, because after college I moved to Iran to work as a freelance journalist and a translator. So I had my family cooking me, Iranian cuisine, and definitely exploring the different regional cuisines of Iran, but I didn't cook it because I was surrounded by it. And I think when I moved back, it really was just 2 years ago that I was like, all right, I'm going to try to cook food from my own heritage. After cooking Japanese, Thai, Korean, Chinese dishes like my whole life. And my fusions are sort of a product of that. You know, the things that I fuse together in these Instagram videos, they are, in many cases, it's kind of like an Asian Iranian fusion or like an East Asian Iranian sort of combination, because those are the cuisines that I now have the most familiarity with.
Have you ever had a dish which you tried to like make numerous times, but you haven't been able to master it yet?
Ooh, a dish that I've tried to make numerous times. Okay, so in terms of mastery, okay, so let me just say first off that there's an Iranian khoresht called fesenjoon, which is like a pomegranate walnut stew. I have never tried to make that, and I would like to master that because in many cases, I think when I've had it, it's either been too sour and it's lacking in sweetness, or it's either been too sweet and it's lacking in tartness. And so I think striking that right balance is very key. And I'd like to try to find a way to make it a bit more savory. So that's kind of one of my goals. A dish that I haven't mastered, so korma sabzi, for example, I will say, definitely when I made it with Chef Najmiya Badmanglij, she is, obviously a master of the cuisine. So hers was incredible. And I kind of say this in the video too, like that is an authentic reaction to me tasting her delicious stew. It just had the perfect mix of savory, tart, just the salt was amazing. It was just great. So I have not yet been able to strike that perfect balance with my korma sabzi. And so it is an effort. Of course, we're always trying to be better, but you want to get savory, you want to get tart. You also want to get enough richness from fat. You don't want to have too much fat, you don't have too little. So again, striking that balance is very important. So I would say that's one, but it's really just for me a number of dishes that I just simply haven't ever attempted to make. And that's kind of, I'm actually going on that journey right now more and more. Another dish, for example, that I'm going to be completely honest, and I think I do a pretty good job with a dish called Mirza Ghasemi, which is kind of an eggplant, egg, tomato based, like I wouldn't call it a stew. I don't know how to, it's not a dipping sauce. This is the thing, we're trying to come up with language to describe our cuisine. But it's eggplant, eggs, tomato. You can eat it with bread. You can eat it with rice. It's delicious. It's from the northern part of Iran, has tons of garlic. I think I do a pretty good job with that. So I think maybe that one is prime for me to bastardize in some way now that I feel like I've mastered it.
Talking about Iranian food, growing up, did your mother pack lunch for you? And how was that experience like?
Yes, she did. And who knows if this may be part of the subconscious reason that I did not explore Iranian food until much later in my life. Because when I did have packed Iranian food and I took it to school, naturally, and I'm sure maybe you or your kids can relate, I would get made fun of. And because, you had kids at school with, ham and cheese sandwich or turkey sandwich or, I don't know, whatever sort of thing they may have had, Dunkaroos, Lunchables. And here's this kid who, like me, brings in a thermos with a green unidentifiable substance in it. And people are like, first off, like, what is that? Has it already gone through the cow once? Like things like that are kind of passed around. And then it smells, of course, the spices and the oils and the delicious flavors, give off this amazing perfume for one who appreciates it, and the dried limes that are in, say, korma sabzi. But alas, that is not appreciated by 7-year-old Jack or John or whoever it might be, or Chad, so yeah, you get lots of weird stares and people making fun of you and whatever that is, or just giving you, again, the stares alone. You don't necessarily have to verbalize something. If just a horde of people just stare at you in a weird way, that already makes you feel a little different. But yes, that was a very real thing. And who knows if that, again, played into me maybe not feeling, as comfortable exploring it. Again, because, obviously if I was into Japanese food, people it seems like, depending on the age of the immigrant group in the United States, those foods become normalized. So I think, when I was 7 or 8 or 9, like, sushi was kind of like, oh, right. Sushi had almost developed hamburger status, like it it was increasingly kind of like, oh, a normal food. And then, when Walgreens starts to package sushi and the gas station starts to package sushi, then that's kind of when it gets to mass consumption status, when everyone knows what it is and it's not sort of a foreign, unidentifiable object anymore. And I think gradually, as we as second generation and third generation immigrants, make more content, whether it's me or, I don't want to in any way compare myself to the likes of, these incredible folks like Hassan Minhaj and, big people that are children of immigrants who are obviously making much bigger waves than I am. But, Hassan Minhaj, Samin Nosrat, Maz Jobrani, when these folks sort of normalize and sort of spread the culture and the knowledge of the culture, who knows if in a generation or two, dal and ghormeh sabzi may very well be just as boring as a hamburger. And maybe that'll be a good thing.
But do you think you could create, as someone who experiments with food all the time, you could create something that is more attuned to, say, lunch for kids, something that can be created out of these dishes in a way, bastardization in a good way, where, our kids can take these to school and not feel embarrassed?
Here's the thing. I don't think we need to change the dish fundamentally. I just think we need to spread the awareness of the dish, right? More and more. So again, if we think about, let's just say sushi, right? Like if you give your 9-year-old sushi and they take it to school, I don't think anyone would bat an eye, right? It would just be like, oh, whatever his or her name is, like, oh, they brought sushi today. No big deal. Let's move on to math, lesson 5. You know what I mean? And I think that for me would be lovely to see, where it's like, oh, especially if John or Jack or Chad or Brad, if they have, like ghormeh sabzi, a packaged ghormeh sabzi that they got from 7-Eleven, like, whoa, that would really be. Or, Rogan Josh, or like, I don't know, anything, like, right? And they're like, oh, Jack has Rogan Josh, or like, John has ghormeh sabzi today, or, for lunch. And like, nobody bats an eye, and then they start talking about what they're going to do for summer vacation. And so like,
right.
I think that to me would be great. That said, I think to your point, who knows if there are other ways of inserting or spreading or innovating, upon certain foods that exist that make them more widespread and more accessible. So, like, for example, there is a company, I think, based in Los Angeles called Boz Bites. It's an Iranian-American company. They have taken basically a cherished Iranian dish known as tahchin, which is, again, this is where I have to come up with analogs because I don't know what the right thing is, but it's kind of like a Persian rice souffle. I don't know. It's basically like rice, saffron, yogurt, salt, pepper, meat, whatever, and then you put it in the oven. You kind of bake it, and then it becomes this delicious yellow, savory rice souffle thing. And what they've done is they've turned it into cupcakes. They've made little cupcakes out of it, so they're baking it in cupcakes, and then they're putting a heaping spoonful of an Iranian khoresht on top of it. So of an Iranian stew, khoresh, what have you, on top of this little cupcake. And I mean, I think that's great. It's definitely a bite-sized way to get that food out there. You're getting 2 cuisines introduced for the price of one, both the souffle thing and the khoresht. And they're frozen. They're selling them to supermarkets. So, again, I can imagine, a kid maybe taking that to school and putting it in the microwave. Like, that could be, and someone being like, oh, what's that? It's like a cupcake? And it's like, oh, no, this is, insert name of khoresht here. I don't know. So.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. You visited a restaurant in Brooklyn and you tried some crazy, wacky stuff there. All kinds of insects, like you were eating ants and you were eating crickets and grasshoppers. What was your favorite insect, by the way? And how do we get over this paranoia or phobia of eating insects?
So yes, that is an organization called Brooklyn Bugs, run by a Korean-American chef named Joseph Yoon. He is, definitely also he too is experimenting and innovating in the kitchen. He's taking dishes that are near and dear to his heritage, whether it's japchae or pajan or anything, and infusing bugs and insects, edible insects, into them. I think there's a lot to be said about edible insects, especially as a sustainable source of protein for the future. Apparently, as the planet's population continues to balloon, we're going to need to find other sources of protein that, for one, don't murder the environment with massive amounts of CO2 emissions, but two, are also packed with nutrients that we need. And grasshoppers, for example, are an excellent source of that. Grasshopper crickets, excellent source of protein. And I think we even did like a little number crunch and per some studies that we came across. And I think there's more protein per volume crickets than there is in, say, like the flesh of a cow, beef. Of course, you would have to, eat a lot of crickets. It would need to be mass produced. It would need to be affordable. Currently, I don't think we have reached a state where it is affordable to consume that amount of crickets. But again, I think they're making advances on this front, and slowly but surely it will become more financially sensible to kind of purchase them. The second thing, of course, is the psychological roadblock that exists for insects. And honestly, for me, and one of my teammates also tried, the crickets. It really is a psychological thing because, we seem to have no problem eating, a cow, right? Or a chicken, or, what other things are there that we eat? Like cheese is expired milk. Sausage, the idea of sausage, basically, it's ground up bits of the animal from God knows which parts sometimes, and it's forced into the intestine of another animal or of the same animal, right? Or like the thin lining that makes the outer part of a sausage, right? And it historically has been like some sort of intestinal or lining from other parts of the organ of the animal. So it's that's a weird concept. The lobster, right? It's a strange looking piece of seafood, but it's normalized. And there's so many foods that I think if you really stand back and you look at, we eat this, like, that are just as quote unquote strange as the concept of eating a cricket, which is honestly, in my opinion, not even that strange. It's another living, breathing organism that's packed with nutrients. Just for whatever reason, whether it's media, whether it's history, I think a lot of insects have sort of received this really bad sort of representation in terms of But again, people there are. How many people around the world? It's like over 2 billion people, I think Joseph Yoon tells us, and we did verify that number as well, that do eat insects and don't think twice about it, right? So it's really something that's quite normalized in many cultures.
It is, but then we see them crawling everywhere, right? Like, especially in New York City, if you see all those, like, I don't know, if you, like, can you eat cockroaches? I am not even sure if you can.
It's I think some you can. And I think, yes, I even when I think about cockroaches, it's a mental block. It's a psychological thing. And it's all a huge journey to see if we can overcome that. Because what is the difference in some cases between the cricket and we could go into this, but like, for example, when you're eating the cricket, you're actually eating the whole animal or the whole organism, whereas with the cow, you're not eating the entire cow, right? So you're not seeing what the cow looks like. You're seeing beef, right? I think a lot of it comes a lot of the challenge is going to be in terms of rebranding and sort of revisualizing insects to sort of overcome that psychological hurdle, right? What if you took off the wings, you took off the legs, you took off the head of the cricket? I know we're getting into sort of, yucky territory, but...
No, but that makes sense to me. It will be more visually appealing then.
Yeah, exactly. So you transform, the sort of the organism into a product or into a form of protein, right? So again, with beef, when you go to the supermarket, you never see the cow. You just see a cube. You see a cube of red or a cube of pink, right? Now, I know vegans and I think vegetarians may not be in agreement with this, but yeah, you see a cube of the animal. With chicken, you see a cube or like a chunk, a morsel of beige. So I think if we try to disguise or rebrand, say, insects, that could also help with helping people overcome that sort of fear they might have of them. Although I don't think all insects are edible. You have to find the right ones. There's edible ones, there's non-edible ones, some that are poisonous. So you always need to be aware. I mean, not everything on this earth is meant for human consumption. But yeah, there are definitely those that are.
Yeah, can you name a recent place before quarantine and social distancing that you traveled to where the food just blew you away? Like, what was the experience like, and why do you think it was so special?
Ooh, the food. Okay, so before quarantine, I can definitely think of a place, and I mean, to me, it's very, very obvious, but the country of Georgia, the Republic of Georgia. I just traveled there with some friends, maybe, I don't know, 6 months ago. I don't know when that was, geez. And we had the best time, and not the least of which, in fact, the main reason of which, I should say, was because of the cuisine. It was honestly the most serendipitous, exciting, stimulating culinary experience I have had in a very long time. Actually, probably oh my God, you know what? I've actually had well, I don't know. Let's see. It's hard to kind of judge, but definitely one of the most stimulating culinary experiences I've ever had. And I was not expecting that. I was expecting to go to Georgia, explore, landmarks and history, maybe do some hikes. But oh my God. And the reason I fell in love with the food myself is, and also my buddies that I traveled with, was because of it's a very just miraculous crossroads of different cultures that you would not believe exist as they do in one place and then fuse together as they do in one place. So just as an example, for, Georgian food is this incredible amalgamation of, you'll see Chinese influence, you'll see Lebanese or influence, you'll see Iranian influence, you'll see South Asian, Indian, Pakistani influence. And you're just wondering, how on earth did this country of like 3 million some odd people, very small, in the mountains, difficult to, inhabit. It's not like this flat plateau of a country. It's very mountainous. And how did this cuisine that is so unique from anything that exists around it form here? With so many disparate influences from radically different parts of the world. So as an example, let me explain. So they have these dumplings, these soup dumplings, right? So we have soup dumplings in Chinese culture, xiaolongbao, these delicious, juicy, just broth-packed dumplings. And so in Georgian culture, they have a similar thing. The dumplings are much bigger. They're called khinkali. And you hold them like a lollipop. So if a dumpling kind of like comes up at the top and it's like pinched at the top, you actually hold the part that's pinched like a lollipop because it's formed into a handle for you. And you hold it, you turn it upside down, you bite into the dumpling, you suck out the juice, the broth, and then you just eat it, and you discard the stem, the clump of dough that kind of forms at the top. And inside of that dumpling are herbs from the region, from Georgia's mountainous region, and then you have the broth. So it's very much a Chinese cuisine, but then like the herbs remind me of Iran, and then the ground meat is again. So it's that's kind of a fascinating thing. And then on the other hand, you have these incredible things they do with eggplant, for example, and walnuts. They make these pastes which remind me of Lebanese kind of pastes that I've had. And then pomegranate. They have pomegranate in their cuisine. They make these delicious stews from walnuts. So it's kind of like, it reminds me of an Iranian fesenjoon, but it's a creamy white stew instead. They have these delicious pastes that they make from fresh vegetables and herbs. They just chop up, they add some oil and some other kind of ingredients, and they form them into little clumps or balls. So it's just like, I'm just going through all of the different influences. They reach into a basket of herbs. Just the herb selection reminds me of Iran. And then, again, some of the stews are very curry-like, and they might remind me of something that, I might have had in Indian or Pakistani cuisine. So I'm seeing all of these influences all in one place. And sorry, I'm just like going on and on and on, but I cannot praise Georgian cuisine enough.
But I'm sure there is some historical context to these influences, right? So did you try to look into why there is so much of like meshing of all these different cultural ideas and identities together in one cuisine?
Totally. And, it comes down to trade routes, right? So when you look at, the past, the Silk Road, trade routes that have formed, over the course of centuries. This is how a lot of these ingredients transfer. And I think that's that's most amazing, is that in this mountainous, tough to inhabit strip of land, trade routes have sort of crisscrossed, and people have shared culture across thousands upon thousands of miles. And that's what has led to this unique formation and of this cuisine. And for example, and I think what's fascinating with Georgian cuisine is that it is a story of people trying to make food from kind of very challenging geographical realities. Given it's a very mountainous country, just to kind of explain one facet of it, because there's so many facets I could go on and on about. It's a very mountainous country, so the reason their food is infused with so many herbs, like say tarragon, tons of tarragon in a lot of things, is because that was an herb that was available to them in the mountainous regions in which they'd kind of be stuck in, right? There's even towns and villages, for example, that are sort of nestled in this sort of mountainous area in a valley, let's say, that do not have easy access to other parts. So they're kind of almost sometimes locked into that region. So, until maybe a merchant or a trade route or something might form. And so what ends up happening is within that sort of locked in region, they're like, okay, well, what do we have? What do we have to make food with? And they're surrounded by these incredible herbs, and tarragon, may very well be one of them. And so they take that tarragon and then they weave it into this. They make a drink out of it, actually. It's like a carbonated sweet drink. I didn't quite love it, I will say, but whatever, it's still an innovation. And so tarragon becomes incorporated, and they find another herb, that's growing naturally in that sort of tiny village valley community, and then they'll kind of incorporate that herb into something, and then they'll kind of crush them together, and they'll form these delicious pastes with maybe some carrots or maybe beets or maybe garlic and other greens. And so it's a product of, hey, we're in this environment. And the other thing is how much of the cuisine relies on vegetables is incredible. Once again, because of what's available to them, meat may not have been something in the past for many cultures that was as readily available. It was more of like perhaps something that you eat on a special occasion, or perhaps something that, again, it's nutrient-rich, protein-rich thing. It involves the slaughter of an animal, and how many of those animals do you have? So you can see in Georgian cuisine, the reliance on vegetables has led to so much creativity of what they do with these vegetables and how they blend them together to create something delicious.
I'm assuming that diet has a lot of influence on longevity, right, and health of people. And it would be interesting to see how their cuisine has impacted that or not.
Yeah, actually, that would be a fascinating look to see, this sort of reliance on fresh herbs and vegetables, and whether that has in any way prolonged the life of folks that live there. I mean, I can't recall the name right now, but there was a village in Georgia that we really very much wanted to visit, but it was kind of like landlocked by mountains, and it was actually extremely dangerous, we were told by sort of our Georgian friends, to go there. And that even, people had died simply trying to drive to this mountain village, because there are parts where the slope of the road that's winding around a huge mountain range is so steep that your car simply tumbles down the mountain, and people have perished, like essentially trying to get to this village. So the people that live in that village, they have kind of their own means of, maybe by foot they manage to get out of it, but they are sort of almost locked in there. So yeah, there's just so many different things about that who knows if within that sort of environment, nutrition and how they try to provide for that. And they obviously have, and they've been living there for very, very long. But if you look at this village that's landlocked, like, what is the life expectancy there? Who knows? It might be one of, what's called one of the blue zones of the world, where they live very, very long. I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked into the demographics of it, but I think, that's a fascinating thing to look at, is folks that have been in a place and they cannot necessarily leave, and they do not necessarily leave as frequently.
Yeah, because there's a place in Pakistan called Hunza, and apparently their life expectancy there ranges between 120 years to 160 years in some cases. And there has been so much research done. It correlates to the diet and their lifestyle, which is crazy, because average life expectancy in Pakistan is very low. It's like around 60 something. So that's why I'm just curious to know how that correlates to, longevity, health, life expectancy.
Totally. I think one of the more interesting stories on that front too is, like, again, the concept of blue zones, right? I think that's what they're called. But there's 5 places on this earth where people have a kind of extremely longer than average life expectancy. One of those places is Okinawa, Japan, the island of Okinawa. So there's a town called Loma Linda in California. There is, what are the other? There's one in Italy, another blue zone in Italy, so that's the third one. I think the fourth may be in Greece, I'm not sure. But anyways, altogether there's 5 in the world, and scientists have kind of identified them and just found it striking that people in these 5 places, for whatever reason, live, noticeably longer than other places. So it's interesting if you explore the different communities. Like in Okinawa, you have a very large kind of senior citizen population, and they have a lot of social contact and exercise in their latter years. Then you go to Loma Linda, California, and I think it's home to a specific strand of Christianity where they are actually largely vegetarian. They do not smoke, and I think they may abstain from other things as well. And perhaps that is the reason why, they don't eat meat. But again, if you go back to Okinawa in Japan, they're eating meat on that island. So very interesting. They're living longer for one reason, whereas the one in California, they're living longer potentially for other reasons. And then you go to Italy, and they're eating, what are they eating in what is I think, is it Sardinia, I believe? Is that the city? Anyways, but it's just like, it's hard to say what is it about these diets. And it's not just one diet, right? It's not everyone's like, oh, the Mediterranean diet is great, there's lots of olive oil. No, there's so many different ways to kind of get to the same destination. And yeah, that would be fascinating.
That is fascinating. So since we have more time on our hands right now, nowadays, like everybody's staying home, what recommendations do you have for our listeners, to build their arsenal of recipes? Because as I said, I am looking for more recipes during Ramzan as well, but also to have better understanding of different cultures and to approach cultures with more respect when it comes to their food.
Well, I think, one way of maybe in this time, it might be appropriate to explore cuisines that you don't have as much familiarity with. And I think one thing I've been doing is, if you can try to look at, cookbooks from people. I've in this time, I've actually purchased a cookbook from kind of Korean American chef Mang Chi. I've purchased a cookbook from Chinese American chef Grace Young, and looking into a cookbook by Palestinian chef Judy Kalla. So I think that to me is one way to express appreciation and spend some time, if you're interested in cooking, by supporting people who are trying to keep cuisines alive in the sort of zeitgeist and the minds and the public consciousness of, humanity. And I think cookbook authors, are doing just that, right? Because cuisine is really one of the main entry points of culture. It's one of the main, to me, it's the most important facet, I think, obviously given my sort of propensities, but it's an entry point to culture and an entry point to dispelling and breaking down misunderstandings. I think eating is something that we all do. And if I can sort of break down a misunderstanding or break down sort of a layer between me and you, or me and another person from another sort of heritage and culture, by simply eating something delicious from what their story is, I don't think there's anything more beautiful than that.
So I normally, in the end of the conversation, ask my guests to describe America in a word or a sentence, but I am going to edit this for you a bit. Considering we've talked so much about food, what does food mean to you? What does America mean to you? And how do you see two intersecting currently?
Ooh, what does food mean to me? What does America mean to me? And how do I see them intersecting? So I think I'm going to go back to that initial question, or the previous answer I gave. And I think food to me is an entry point of culture. Food to me is really almost a synonym for culture, because eating is something that we all do as humans. We need to eat to survive, right? So why not kind of, while we're trying to subsist and survive and whatever it happens to be, why not spend that time to also learn about each other while doing this thing that is necessary for our continued existence? So I think, that to me is the true beauty of what food and cuisine can offer, is it can, by my trying cuisine from your culture or from another culture that is not the same as mine, I can sort of break down any misunderstandings or any gaps and any layers that might exist between us and kind of remind me of our shared humanity. So that to me, I think, is the beauty of food. In terms of your second question, what's very interesting about America, and I think this is a very interesting social experiment that I'm not sure has a parallel in history, really, to this extent that we're witnessing in America, but it's multiculturalism, right? This is truly, it has been a land that has been increasingly populated by immigrants to an extent that, again, I don't think we've seen in history. Despite the ebbs and flows that we're witnessing now, especially those that target my community, I am more or less, fingers crossed, as they say, optimistic that the sort of trajectory of America will continue as a land offering refuge to those, to immigrants from all over the world. And that is what I think makes America unique, is when these people come to this land. At one point in time, it was from, say, Europe. Now it's spread to all corners of the world. When they come from their kind of point of origin, their home country, to this land, for whatever reason, they bring with them their culture. And as we've discussed, food is the primary entry point, I think, for culture. And they bring that culture to America. They bring their cuisine to America. They cook for their kids, and maybe they'll open a restaurant. Maybe they'll open, or they'll sell something to someone, to a supermarket, who knows? But then that culture, that cuisine enters the sort of huge, the giant American swimming pool. I'm trying to avoid the use of the overuse of the term melting pot. It enters sort of the American kind of cultural, what do we call it? Jacuzzi. I'm going to call it a jacuzzi.
Sounds better, yeah.
With different things flying around, including dead skin cells. No, I'm just kidding. But it enters sort of, again, the American cultural ether, right? And everything is swimming around. And I think the problem with melting pot is, when we say melting pot, it erases what makes us unique. It says you need to melt yourself and conform yourself to the general sort of the normal, right? Whereas I think if you say maybe jacuzzi, which is definitely very, very unconventional, but those dead skin cells in the jacuzzi are still floating around. And I don't think they're melding or grappling or melting into anything. They're definitely floating around, and everyone's skin cells are floating around in that jacuzzi. So I think one way to think of it is, America is the big cultural jacuzzi, and everything is floating around, sort of brushing against another thing. And sometimes things will be paired together in ways that they were not paired together in, say, the origin country, right? We're talking about the cupcake situation that I talked about with tachin, or, we have Walgreens sushi, or we have, even... This is not an American thing, it was a British thing, but, what chicken tikka masala, that is not, an Indian dish, but it is a transformation of something that existed before. And maybe one day we'll have korma sabzi pizza. We definitely already have sushi burritos. And I think people might be turned off by this, but I think this is beautiful. I think it's a beautiful, melding together of cultures. And that is what makes America unique in a way, I think, that other places in the world perhaps are not, is this cultural melding and mixing and pairing will continue to happen here at a rate that far exceeds, I think, other places in history and time and what have you. And so, yeah, that to me is incredible. And again, I think we need to really remove ourselves from this moment in time, because some things might seem weird or anachronistic now, but if you take a step back and you move forward 100 years, the sushi burrito and the korma sabzi pizza, and I'm just going to throw this out there, the Rogan Josh dumpling, all of these things may in fact be so ordinary that, again, no one would bat an eye at the mere mention of them 100 years from now, because how cultural and how food and cuisine shifts. And just to kind of remind you of that example of the tomato, where the tomato didn't exist in many of the cuisines of Eurasia 150 years ago, 200 years ago, who knows? So,
and how do you see them intersecting?
How do I see American food intersecting? Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that, right? It's America could be a place like other places in the world where, again, these cuisines and these cultures intersect and pair together in ways that I think are unique and unprecedented. And again, because where else do you find such diversity in such close contact? I was talking to a friend the other day, I mean, not to kind of bring up a tangential story, but he was like, yeah, there's this like cafe in New York where I think he says like a Black American and a Mexican American walk into a cafe that's staffed by Beninese Americans, from Benin, and Singaporean Americans. But the cafe is owned by, I don't know, it was just like 5 different cultures kind of crammed into one place. Yeah. So you have from different continents, right? You have, Mexico and the North American continent, Central American, and then you have Africa, and then you have, so I think that is the sort of close cultural contact and proximity that we have in the United States that I don't think is replicated in many other parts of the world, if any. And when those food cultures collide and pair together in unique ways, we'll definitely be, bear witness to something quite extraordinary. I think I think quite authentic to America.
Thank you so much, Yara. This was wonderful. Where can people find your documentaries, your videos? How do they follow you on social media? What's your IG, your Twitter handle?
Okay, so my Instagram, I think basically most of my handles on the internet are at Yelmjouie. So that's basically the first letter of my first name, my last name. So that's at YELM as in Mary, JOUIE. And then that if you use that, you'll get me on Instagram, you'll get me on Twitter. I offer different content on each. So it's tailored to, more food and quirky stuff on Instagram, slightly more political stuff on Twitter. And then Facebook, don't really use it that much. And YouTube, I'm still hoping to start a channel at some point.
Maybe we can have another episode on politics of it all.
Ooh, yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, definitely have stuff to say about politics and kind of our place in American society and how things are changing and challenges. But yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you, Yara. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this wonderful, wonderful episode. I can't wait to try all the crazy stuff. Grasshoppers, ants, crickets, and gourmet sabzi pizza, which is not that crazy, but it is surely delicious. And if you need more information about our upcoming episodes, our previous episodes, our Patreon account, our GoFundMe, our Instagram, Twitter, you can visit our website, immigrantlypod.com. We'll see you next time when we have another amazing guest. And in the meantime, stay safe and stay connected.